Hello, my name is Chris Monroe. I work for Greenlight Group as a senior engineer. My focus has been in the Operations Center workspace, a little over 6 years of experience so far. Today, we're actually going to be talking about the integration between Universal CMDB and Network Node Manager I-Series software.
Thank you for joining me today. In this presentation, I'm going to be going over the components needed to set up the integration between Universal CMDB and NNMI. There are actually three parts to this integration. The first part is pulling the layer 2 information from NNM and using that to populate the UCMDB database. There is then a component that we can use from UCMDB to send some information from UCMDB back to NNM, keeping those objects in sync. And the third piece is extending the functionality of NNM to now make use of that data that we send back from UCMDB. So to get started, I'm going to go here into Data Flow Management, and this particular integration uses a discovery pattern, not the integration studio. So I'm going to go into the Discovery Control panel, and in our discovery-based product integrations, you'll notice there's an NNM Layer 2 module. In this module, we have two patterns. The first one here, this Layer 2 by NNM, is the pattern that's going to allow us to pull the data from NNM, and we're going to populate the UCMDB database with that data. There's a couple of pieces that we need to know ahead of time in order to use this pattern. And the first of those is the credentials. We actually need to know the URL, the IP address, the username and password to log in. Now, the username and password is stored in the Dataflow Probe setup as a standard UCMDB set of credentials. There is a particular type of credentials called the NNM protocol. As we come in here, you'll notice I've got the ability to look at UCMDB from UCMDB with port 80 non-SSL or SSL. Depending on your options, you can use either one. I had to set both of these up. So if we go in and look at the details, you can set the timeout, and on the NNM side you can set a username and a password and then the port number to use along with that protocol, HTTP or HTTPS. Then you also have to have the integration user account information for the UCMDB server, because we're going to make some web services calls to the NNM server, and then we're going to populate the database with those results. So in this case, you can see I've got SSL on both sides, port 443 for NNM, port 8443 for the UCMDB. Those are the defaults. You'll want to make sure to adjust those ports to the correct ports for how it's running in your environment. Now, as we go over here to the discovery pattern, now that we have those credentials, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to activate this Layer 2 by NNM discovery pattern. But if you see, when I activate it, it's not really going to do anything but turn it on. We've got this little running symbol, but we're still not actually doing anything to bring in data. The reason for that is we need to get the IP address of the NNM server still. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to look for the IP address of our NNM server. You'll notice here we've got one IP address. I'm going to go ahead and add that, and that is what triggers the start of the web services call. So now you can see here the probe is doing its work. We are going out and making some web services call to the NNM server. This is going to take a little bit of time, but once that's done, then you'll see this in progress go from in progress to success. As soon as that happens, I will come back and show you what the results of that look like. Okay, now that that has had a chance to finish, you'll notice we've got success. One of the things we can do if you wanted to take a look at that is we can look at the results that were pulled back from NNM now. This is a query back to the probe saying, tell me what you found. You're going to find that we have numerous IP addresses, subnets, interfaces. It created routers, switches, servers alike. Anything that was in NNM, it's going to bring it all across. As you can see here, 1,400 interfaces, 500 membership relationships. All of these now exist in the UCMDB database. One of the things that they have associated with them now is a UCMDB ID. End of step 1. Now, if we wanted to take these values and write them back to NNM so that we have a way to keep track of what is and isn't synchronized between the two databases, we can turn on the second pattern. Now, this update IDs in NNM pattern is what allows us to do that. If I turn this one on, that is actually going to go through the entire UCMDB database looking for values that have that NNM object that we got from the layer 2 by NNM discovery, and we're going to send those back to NNM with a UCMDB ID associated with them. Alright, now that we've had a chance to let that run its course, now you can take a look at the NNM interface, and for those objects that we had in NNM, if you come in and look now, that pattern that we just enabled on the UCMDB server wrote a custom attribute back. Here is an example of a switch, and if we go over and look at the custom attributes, there is now a UCMDB ID. This ID was the one that was generated by the UCMDB server that we have now sent back to NNM. So now we've done the first two steps. We've pulled all of the inventory from NNM, layer 2, layer 3 information, and created all of those relationships. And we've now sent the resulting information back to the NNM server. The last piece of this puzzle now involves making a change on the NNM server. For those first two steps, we didn't have to do anything to NNM. It was all on the UCMDB side. As long as we had credentials, that was fine. Now, in the NNM server, if we wanted to make use of that new information that we have, under the integration modules here, we do have an integration to Hpu Cmdb. And if we turn this integration on, you'll notice that we've got similar credential information that we can enter. And if we fill this information out for our UCMDB server and turn this on, we're going to create a prefix rule here. And we can choose SSL if we would like to. In this case, I'm just going to use standard port 80 and the default 8080 on the UCMDB server. And if I turn this integration on, with this enabled, we will now have the ability to access UCMDB information from the NNM server. Okay, now that we have completed the third step, we've got the integration credentials on the NNM server. There are a couple of things that you'll see in the interface now that we didn't see before. We have access to this find UCMDB impacted CIs now, and that is available to us because of that integration. So if I choose a device in NNM, as long as it's got a UCMDB ID associated with it now as a custom attribute, I'll go in and just double check real quick. You can see here that we have written the UCMDB ID as a custom attribute here on this device. So I can go to those actions and I can look up information real time from the UCMDB server. So now this is data that's correlated on the UCMDB side, not just NNM. So here's a list of devices that are impacted by or related to in some way connecting to this device that I've chosen. The 3560, I believe, is what I picked. But if we pick any one of these, you'll notice we also now have the ability, if we want to cross-launch back into UCMDB. So right from the NNM interface, we can look at all of the details of that device the way it appears on the UCMDB server. So now we've got information being discovered by NNM down to layer 2, layer 3 information, and since all of that work is already being done by NNM, we aren't duplicating that effort on the UCMDB server. We're simply making use of the data that's already been gathered by NNM. We have sent that information over to the UCMDB server, and we have now updated NNM with the information from the UCMDB database, including that UCMDB ID, so that we can reconcile all of these objects, and we can now keep track in both interfaces, NNM and UCMDB, the same CI, the same switch, statuses, access, impact, and all of that ability is now within these web interfaces on both sides. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to working with you some more.